Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Imagine making the most scandalous, life-threatening claim possible right in front of your fiercest enemies. You have just looked a paralyzed man in the eye and told him his sins are forgiven. In doing so, you basically told a room full of rigid religious scholars that you possess the authority of God himself.
Yeah, and they are absolutely furious. The tension in that room is thick enough to cut with a knife, and they are silently plotting a way to charge you with blasphemy.
Right, so in that moment, human instinct screams at you to do one of two things. You either fight back and assert your dominance in that room, or you slip out the back door. You grab your closest friends and go into hiding until the heat dies down.
But you do neither of those things. Instead, you walk right out the front door and head straight for the busiest, loudest, most exposed commercial intersection in the entire region.
You set up your platform right where the merchants are haggling, the soldiers are patrolling, and the blue-collar workers are sweating through their daily labor. And that is precisely what Jesus does in one easily ignored sentence in the Gospel of Mark. Today, we are analyzing a single verse, chapter 2, verse 13.
When you read a historical text, it is incredibly common to let your eyes glaze over the transitional sentences. You see a verse that seems to just move the characters from point A to point B, and you assume it is just stage direction placed between the real action.
Yeah, the text simply reads, "And he went forth again by the seaside, and all the multitude resorted unto him, and he taught them." On the surface, that looks like connective tissue. I mean, Jesus leaves the house, goes to the beach, a crowd shows up, and he talks to them.
But the sources we are looking at today, which include a pair of extensive expository essays, argue something very different. They argue that this specific verse is a massive theological statement. It functions as a critical hinge in the entire narrative of his earthly ministry.
To grasp why this single sentence carries so much weight, we have to understand the intense pressure of the location Jesus is leaving behind. We really need to visualize the physical space. Jesus is stepping out of a suffocating, crowded house in Capernaum and heading toward the open shores of the Sea of Galilee.
I'm glad you brought up the setting. The physical and historical environment is entirely indispensable for grasping the gravity of this passage.
Yeah.
We have to place ourselves right in first-century Capernaum.
And it was not some sleepy, remote village disconnected from the wider world. I think that is a very common misconception.
Yeah.
Capernaum was actually a bustling, highly strategic commercial and military hub.
Absolutely. It sat directly on the Via Maris, which was the major international trade route connecting Egypt with the northern empires like Syria. Because of this massive flow of international traffic, Capernaum was saturated with a diverse and often tense population.
You had local Jewish residents trying to maintain their covenantal purity, and they were living side by side with Roman centurions stationed there to keep the peace and protect those trade routes. Plus, you had Gentile merchants passing through with their caravans, bringing foreign goods and customs.
And crucially for this narrative, you had a heavy presence of tax collectors. They were operating under the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas. Herod was a tetrarch appointed by Rome, basically a puppet ruler who governed through fear and aggressive taxation.
Right, and those tax collectors were viewed by the local Jewish population as absolute traitors. They were seen as collaborators who had sold their souls to the Roman oppressors for financial gain. So the air in Capernaum is always thick with political tension, economic disparity, and religious strictness.
Well, prior to this verse, Jesus is inside a house in this very city. The house is completely packed, the air is stagnant, and the crowd is pressing in so tightly that nobody can even get through the door, let alone find a place to sit.
It is in that cramped, highly scrutinized domestic space that a paralyzed man is lowered through the roof. Jesus heals him, but more shockingly, he declares his divine right to forgive sins. This declaration instantly triggers allegations of blasphemy from the scribes sitting right there in the room.
The religious tension reaches a boiling point, and it is from that claustrophobic, hostile, and religiously policed environment that Jesus makes his exit toward the sea.
I have to push back here a little bit, or at least look at this through the lens of basic human strategy. If he just claimed the right to forgive sins, which is the most explosive theological claim possible in that culture, why walk out into the loudest place available?
That is a fair question. It does seem counterintuitive at first glance.
I mean, if I am trying to teach a new, highly controversial theology to my disciples, I do not go to a fish market. I pull my people aside into a quiet room and secure the perimeter. I make sure I am understood clearly without the distraction of seagulls, crashing waves, and Roman soldiers marching by.
Yeah. Why risk a riot? Or at the very least, why risk your message being completely drowned out by the noise of the Via Maris? It seems like stepping out of the house and going to the commercial district is a terrible tactical move. But we have to look at the Greek verb used here for he went out.
Right, it is a very specific term. We see a word that denies any sense of panic or accidental wandering. We're seeing a word that points to a completed, highly purposeful action.
The original text uses an aorist verb here, and without getting bogged down in grammar textbooks, the way this word functions implies a definitive choice. It is the difference between being chased out of a room by an angry mob and confidently shutting the door behind you.
He decides the meeting is over. Jesus is not fleeing the religious leaders in a panic because they accused him of blasphemy. He is governing his own mission at every step.
He decides when the encounter in the house is finished, and he decides where the next phase of his ministry will occur. He intentionally relocates his platform from an enclosed domestic space to the wide-open expanse of the Sea of Galilee.
And stepping out to the sea means stepping right into the center of labor and commerce. The shore was loud, it smelled of fish and sweat, boats were coming and going, nets were being repaired, and tolls were being collected right there.
So we have to ask about the theological logic behind choosing the stock exchange over the library. The logic is found in his refusal to let the religious establishment dictate the terms of his ministry. The intentionality of that movement is highlighted by a single critical word in the text.
You mean the word, again. Mark includes this small adverb to show that Jesus is returning to a very specific pattern of public engagement. He refuses to be confined by the architectural or institutional boundaries of his day.
Right, the religious leaders expected spiritual instruction to take place within the controlled environment of the synagogue. There, they could monitor the doctrine, enforce their traditions, and regulate who was allowed in the audience. Or instruction might happen in a private home among selected disciples behind closed doors.
But Jesus shatters those boundaries. By going out to the sea again, he makes a massive statement about accessibility. His message is not a secret philosophy meant only for a sequestered group of scholars.
He takes the truth directly to the location where the fishermen, the merchants, the tax collectors, and the socially marginalized are already gathered for their daily survival. His kingdom is public, and his call goes out to the highways and the hedges.
Furthermore, we must recognize the contextual weight of this action, following the healing of the paralytic. The scribes understood clearly that only God can forgive sins. Therefore, they viewed his statement as an act of supreme theological treason.
In a normal human conflict, after making such a provocative statement, a person would lay low. You sense the rising hostility of the authorities, so you retreat into the shadows to let the heat die down. But Jesus does the precise opposite.
He steps out of the house and walks directly into the most exposed, highly visible arena available in the entire region. He claims divine authority, and then he immediately claims a public square to exercise it, completely bypassing the religious gatekeepers.
Think about it like a high-stakes corporate scenario. Imagine a highly sought-after speaker scheduled to give a presentation in an exclusive VIP conference room. Access is strictly controlled with velvet ropes and security details at the door.
Yeah, only the most elite academics and institutional leaders are allowed inside. The air is refined, and the etiquette is very rigid. In the middle of the presentation, the speaker makes a claim so massive and disruptive that the elites are ready to silence him.
Instead of arguing with them or apologizing, the speaker calmly unplugs his microphone. He picks up his speaker system, walks past the security detail, and leaves the building entirely. He walks straight down to the middle of a bustling, chaotic stock exchange.
He sets up his equipment right on the trading floor, right where people are shouting, sweating, making deals, and stressing over their livelihoods. He takes the message out of the ivory tower and broadcasts it to the laborers and the outcasts.
That is what Jesus is doing on the shore of Galilee. He goes right to where the sinners are, and this brings a massive shift in the narrative.
Jesus moves out, and in response, the world moves in. We shift from Christ's deliberate action to the human reaction. The text tells us that all the multitude was coming to him.
That shift sets up a fascinating dynamic between the Savior and the people. If Jesus is moving into this chaotic commercial space, who is actually meeting him there? Because a crowd on the Via Maris is not just going to be devout synagogue goers looking for a Bible study.
That is a great point, and the grammar of this gathering gives us the answer. When the text says the crowd was coming, it employs an imperfect tense verb. This tense describes an action that is continuous, ongoing, or repeating in the past.
Right. It is not a single snapshot in time where a group of people suddenly appears on the beach all at once. Rather, it is like a motion picture. It indicates a ceaseless, flowing stream of humanity pouring out of the city streets and flocking toward him.
It is a relentless convergence. And we have to pay very close attention to the specific word Mark uses to define this multitude. He uses the Greek word aklos, which translates to a mixed, unrefined multitude or even a mob.
It implies a chaotic, diverse assembly of common people. Mark deliberately chooses this word instead of the word laos. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, laos is frequently used as a specialized term, referring specifically to the covenant people of Israel.
It carries all their ceremonial status and religious heritage. By using aklos, Mark is painting a picture of raw humanity. This gathering strips away the polished veneer of religious pedigree.
The physical gravity of Christ's presence is drawing an indiscriminate mass of human need. They come regardless of their social standing, their ceremonial purity, or their adherence to the traditions of the elders. They are simply drawn to the authority of the man standing by the water.
The establishment of the synagogue is left behind, and the raw, unrefined mob takes its place. It really forces you to ask yourself, if you were on that beach, why would you be there? It is so easy to think that just being near the action is the same thing as actually following the teacher.
When we look at this unrefined multitude, we know that crowds are never monolithic in their motivations. When an event draws thousands of people, they are not all there for the same reason. This massive stream of humanity represents a concept that theologians refer to as the general or external call.
The message and the presence of Jesus are acting like a massive magnet. But the metal shavings being pulled toward him are of all different varieties. Some people are desperately rushing to the shore because they have a physical illness and they just want a miracle.
Yeah, they are seeking physical healing and nothing more. Others are purely driven by curiosity. They heard about the roof being torn off the house in Capernaum, and they want to see the spectacle for themselves.
Then you have the politically motivated individuals who hate Roman oppression. They are hoping this strong teacher might lead a violent revolt against Herod and Caesar. And, well, undoubtedly mixed into this crowd are the spies and the skeptics.
Right, the religious agents who followed him out of the house specifically looking for an accusation to use against him. Being part of the crowd, witnessing the miracles, or enjoying the gathering of the community is vastly different from true discipleship.
You can be standing 5 feet away from the Son of God on the shore of Galilee, completely captivated by the moment, and you can still have a heart that is entirely resistant to his actual authority. That is a very sobering reality for anyone listening right now.
The reality of those mixed motives leads us directly into the supreme action of the verse. We establish the deliberate withdrawal of Christ and the continuous gathering of this mixed multitude. The tension in the narrative is peaking at this moment.
Confronted with this massive, desperate, chaotic crowd, what is the response of the Messiah? How does he handle the mob? The final clause states, and he was teaching them.
Once again, Mark employs the continuous tense for the verb, was teaching. Just as the crowd was continuously arriving, Jesus was continuously, systematically instructing them. He did not offer a brief greeting or a quick motivational speech.
This was prolonged, sustained discourse. And the specific choice of the verb used for teaching is highly instructive here. Mark could have used a word that means heralding or announcing a proclamation, like a town crier.
He also could have used a word that means healing or curing physical ailments. That is what a large portion of the crowd undoubtedly wanted from him. Instead, he uses a word that refers to systematic, didactic instruction.
It is the careful, reasoned explanation of truth, designed to renew the mind and instruct the intellect. In this specific action, Jesus is executing his office as the supreme prophet. This connects directly back to the Old Testament.
Yes, specifically the promise given in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Moses tells the people that God will raise up a prophet like him from among their brothers, and that the people must listen to him. By standing on the shoreline and delivering the word of God, Jesus is visibly fulfilling that ancient promise.
He is the ultimate lawgiver and prophet, interpreting the will of God with absolute, inherent authority. I am looking at this scene, and I am struck by how backwards it seems compared to how we build movements today. Think about the sheer pragmatism that drives so much of our modern culture.
Especially when it comes to gathering large groups of people. If an organizer today manages to pull together a massive, desperate crowd, the immediate instinct is to figure out how to maintain their attention. You try to satisfy their immediate cravings and keep them coming back.
You give them a show. You give them an emotional high. You use music, lights, or sensational claims to bind the crowd to your movement. But Jesus flatly refuses to use miracles or entertainment to satisfy the crowd on this beach.
He does not perform a spectacular sign to dazzle the skeptics or incite a political rally to appease the zealots. He simply sits down and teaches. He systematically unpacks objective truth.
It seems almost counterintuitive if the goal is to build a popular following. But of course, his goal is entirely different. By choosing rigorous instruction over a sensory spectacle, Jesus demonstrates that the deepest, most urgent need of the human soul is not a temporary emotional lift.
It is not even the immediate alleviation of physical suffering. The deepest need is objective divine truth. He refuses to manipulate their emotions because he is aiming directly at the mind and the conscience.
He is treating the crowd not as consumers of a religious product, but as moral agents. They must hear the truth, understand it, and make a decision to submit to it. He operates on the principle that the word itself is entirely sufficient to accomplish the purpose of God.
The contrast between divine sufficiency and human pragmatism cannot be overstated here. When Jesus addresses the mind and the conscience through systematic instruction, he diagnoses the true human condition. Pragmatism treats the symptoms.
All right, pragmatism assumes that if people are sad, they need entertainment, or if they are sick, they only need a physical cure. But Christ, as the ultimate physician of the soul, knows that the root of all human misery is alienation from God through sin.
And the only remedy for that alienation is the truth of God received by faith. The mind must be illuminated, the conscience must be convicted, and the will must be redirected. This can only happen through the systematic impartation of truth.
Having examined the mechanics of the verse, the departure, the gathering, and the teaching, we must now zoom out. We need to observe how this specific moment functions as a bridge between two radical events in Mark's narrative. The sequence is vital.
Just prior to this verse, Jesus forgives a paralyzed man, asserting his divine authority over sin. Immediately after this verse, in verse 14, Jesus is walking along and he calls Levi. He calls a despised tax collector to follow him.
Our verse sits exactly between the public declaration of authority and the specific, scandalous application of grace to an individual outcast. This sequence illustrates the relationship between general grace and particular grace. The widespread public teaching by the sea represents the external call.
The truth is scattered broadly over the entire mixed multitude. But this broad broadcasting of the word directly prepares the ground for the specific, sovereign summons of an individual sinner. Theologians refer to this as the internal, effectual call.
The teaching creates the theological context in which the specific call of Levi actually makes sense. Think about it like a massive radio tower situated on a hill. It broadcasts a powerful signal across an entire, sprawling city.
That broadcast is the external call, the public teaching of Jesus on the beach. Every single person in the city with a radio can hear the broadcast. Some people tune in and just hear static because they are not paying attention.
Some people hear the music or the voice, and they enjoy it as background noise while they go about their day. Some people hear it and actively dislike it, so they turn the dial. That is the crowd on the beach. Everyone hears the instruction, but the reactions vary widely based on their own inclinations.
Now imagine that among the thousands of radios in the city, there is one specific receiver unit sitting in a toll booth. This particular radio is sovereignly internally wired by the broadcaster to resonate with one exact frequency.
When the broadcaster speaks a specific command over the airwaves, that one radio does not just play the sound. The frequency activates a mechanism inside the unit that causes the listener to instantly drop everything they are doing and respond to the command. That is the internal, effectual call.
Jesus preaches to the masses, laying down the truth of the kingdom for all to hear. But then he walks past Levi's tax booth, locks eyes with him, and says, "Follow me." And Levi, who is steeped in collaboration with Rome and despised by his community, immediately leaves his lucrative, corrupt career and follows.
The broad instruction sets the stage, but the sovereign specific call achieves the miraculous result. That mechanism of sovereign grace is what offends the self-righteous religious establishment of the first century so deeply.
Consider the optics from the perspective of a Pharisee or a scribe. First, the supposed teacher of Israel abandons the synagogue, which is the proper sanctioned place for theological discourse. Second, he goes down to the commercial shoreline and instructs a massive, unwashed mob.
He is casting the pearls of divine wisdom before the common, ceremonially unclean masses. Third, and most shockingly, he takes the authority demonstrated in that teaching and uses it to invite a known collaborator of the Roman government to be his direct disciple.
He invites a man who extorts money from God's covenant people. This shatters the entire religious paradigm of merit and purity. The establishment believed that favor was earned through rigorous adherence to the law and separation from sinners.
By leaving the religious elite behind to teach the mob and call the tax collector, Jesus demonstrates that his mercy is completely sovereign. It is entirely unmerited. He is proving that he came not to call the righteous, but sinners.
This sequence destroys human boasting. It shows that the kingdom of God does not advance by recruiting the elite and the self-sufficient. It advances by sovereignly calling the destitute and the despised through the vehicle of the preached word.
The teacher provides the truth, and the Savior provides the grace to respond to it. So we have to look at how this impacts the original readers of Mark's gospel. Mark did not write this account in a vacuum.
No, he wrote it for a very specific target audience. He wrote to Gentile Christians who were living in the city of Rome under the shadow of Emperor Nero. When you think about Rome in the first century, you are thinking about an empire built on sensory overload.
It was a culture of massive architectural achievements and overwhelming displays of political and military might. They had brutal, visceral entertainment. The Roman populace was kept pacified by bread and circuses, gladiatorial games, chariot races, and violent theatrical displays.
The Christians living in this environment were a marginalized, persecuted minority. They were surrounded by a society that valued dominance, spectacle, and immediate gratification above all else. In that terrifying and overwhelming context, Mark includes this quiet, specific verse about Jesus teaching by the sea.
He's providing a vital corrective message to ground these believers. The corrective nature of this message for the Roman Church was absolutely essential for their survival.
When believers are surrounded by a hostile culture that utilizes massive sensory and political displays to assert dominance, the temptation is to try and compete on the same terms. The temptation is to believe that the church needs its own spectacles or political revolutions to validate its existence.
Mark is writing to correct that fatal assumption. By showing the Messiah standing on a beach, rejecting the demand for constant miracles, and instead delivering systematic verbal instruction, Mark is teaching the Roman Christians how the kingdom of God actually advances.
It does not advance through the sword, it does not advance through theatrical entertainment, and it does not advance through sensory manipulation. It advances through the authoritative declaration of truth. Mark tells these persecuted believers that they do not need a sign from heaven every day to prove that Christ is reigning.
They do not need to overthrow Nero to prove that Christ is king. They needed to rest entirely, completely, and sufficiently on the written and preached word. The instruction of Christ, passed down through the apostles, was the bedrock upon which they were to build their lives.
It was the foundation for their families and their endurance in the face of the lions and the flames. The word alone is sufficient to sustain the church, even in the center of a pagan empire.
That reality speaks right to you, the modern listener. We may not be facing gladiatorial arenas, but we are living in a highly pragmatic, hyper-digital era that is fundamentally identical to Rome in its demands. Our culture is addicted to sensory overload.
We are constantly demanding entertainment, instant gratification, mystical signs, or subjective validation for everything we believe. We want our information delivered in 10-second, highly produced video clips. We want our spiritual experiences to feel like a rock concert, complete with a light show and a fog machine.
We want to feel a certain way before we are willing to believe a certain thing. But this text from Mark chapter 2 challenges all those modern assumptions. It challenges you to evaluate what you actually value when it comes to spiritual growth.
It asks you to lay down the demand for quick emotional highs. Instead, you must cultivate an appreciation for slow, rigorous, systematic instruction. The truth that actually alters a human life does not usually arrive in a flash of emotional lightning.
It arrives through the steady, faithful, continuous teaching of the Word, just as Jesus provided for that crowd on the beach. It requires patience, it requires intellectual engagement, and it requires a willingness to submit your mind to an objective standard outside of yourself.
That submission to an objective standard leads us to a vital theological principle concerning the life of a believer after they are called. Once you pull someone out of the mob, they need a blueprint for how to live. Historically, theologians call this the third use of the law.
We recognize that God's law serves multiple purposes. It acts as a mirror to show us our sin and drive us to Christ, and it acts as a bridle to restrain evil in society. But the third and primary use for the believer is that the moral law serves as a perfect rule of life.
Once a person has been sovereignly called out of the chaotic crowd, just as Levi was called from his tax booth, they are not left to wander in a state of subjective, lawless spirituality. The continuous teaching that Jesus delivered on the beach provides the framework for grateful obedience.
Christ does not save people so they can continue living according to the chaotic motives of the crowd. He saves them to become disciples who pattern their lives after his instruction. The teaching is not a burden, it is the joyful guide for a renewed heart.
Systematic instruction is necessary because spectacles do not teach you how to love your neighbor. They do not teach you how to mortify your sin or how to worship God in spirit and in truth. Only the systematic instruction of the Word can provide the guardrails for a life of holiness.
The believer looks at the law of God not as a ladder to climb to earn salvation, but as a lighted path to walk upon. They walk upon it because they have already been saved by the sovereign grace of the prophet who called them.
I think that captures the essence of this passage perfectly. The sequence of events on that shoreline provides a complete picture of grace and instruction.
So, to provide a concise wrap-up of everything we have covered in this deep dive, we started by looking at Christ's deliberate, sovereign exit from the private, enclosed sphere of the Capernaum house, stepping out into the public, commercial center of the Via Maris.
We examined the relentless, continuous gathering of a mixed, chaotic multitude, drawn by the external call of his authority. And we focused heavily on his uncompromising dedication to systematic, didactic instruction over the cheap pragmatism of spectacle and entertainment.
We saw how this broad teaching prepared the ground for the specific, scandalous call of Levi the tax collector. And that leads me to leave you with a final closing consideration to mull over on your own.
It is a question every reader of Mark's Gospel has to answer for themselves.
When you approach the things of God, when you seek out spiritual truth or attend a gathering, are you acting as part of the crowd? Looking for a temporary experience, a quick fix, or something that simply satisfies your curiosity for an hour? Or are you willing to sit quietly under an authority that has the absolute right to completely rewrite your life, your priorities, and your future, just as it did for the tax collector sitting by the sea?